Welcome back to Movies Explained. Today's film is a crime drama from 1996 titled Gotti. The movie begins with Mafia boss John Gotti as he is being sent to prison. In a dark interrogation room, John Gotti lays down the law, explaining the brutal rules of the game. He recalls his dramatic rise from soldier to capo, and eventually the boss of the Gambino family. The story shifts to 1973. John Gotti is sitting in a club with all of his friends, drinking and gambling, when he is interrupted by Neil, who informs him that Carlo, the boss of the Gambino crime family, wants to see him. Neil is Carlo's underboss and John's mentor, but his unexpected arrival and this invitation catch John off guard. John asks Neil if he can bring his friend Angie along, and Neil agrees. Upon entering Carlo's place, John is greeted by several notable figures, including Sammy Gravano, a key member of the Gambino family. John finally meets the ailing and elderly Carlo, head of the Gambino family. Carlo respects John and values his integrity. He advises him that the family must always stay away from drugs as the FBI will never tolerate drugs. He then reveals the primary reason he invited John: his nephew was murdered by the Irish, and he wants John to take revenge. However, John is asked to work alongside Paul Castellano's crew member Ralph Gallione. On the way back, John discusses the meeting with Neil and expresses his reservations about working with someone who is not a member of his crew. John requests Neil to replace Gallione with Sammy, who can be trusted and is more suitable for the job. However, Neil convinces him to follow Carlo's orders, which means working with Gallione. Later, John and Angie meet Gallione as they prepare for their trip to Staten Island, where their target is located. As they pick him up in their car, they notice Gallione snorting drugs and acting a little abnormal. The trio discusses the plan, and they decide to follow John's plan to lure the murderer out of the club by tricking him into a drug deal and then taking him out near the parking lot. Upon reaching the location, John sticks to the plan and begins talking to the target. However, just as he is about to succeed in his mission to draw him out of the club, Gallione comes and sabotages the whole operation. He shoots the target openly, drawing everyone's attention to them, which infuriates John. Enraged with Gallione, Gotti gives the order to have him killed. Later, Paul holds a meeting with Carlo and shows his anger toward the death of Ralph, claiming that John wrongfully murdered him without his approval. The others, however, defend John, claiming Ralph deserved it for his foolishness and putting everyone's life in danger. Neil makes every effort to persuade Carlo to pardon John. He explains that despite breaking Cosa Nostra rules, his actions were justified. The meeting concludes with a decision that John deserves to be punished for breaking the rule and murdering Ralph. The scene shifts to John spending quality time with his family as his son is playing football on the school team. He greets his neighbor, Favara, whose son is playing on the same team. Later, Neil confronts John and scolds him for breaking the Gambino family's rules and whacking Ralph without permission. Neil informs him that Paul almost had him whacked, but gave him a pass because of Neil. He tells John that if Carlo had given him the order to take John out, he would not have hesitated. He informs John that he will cut a deal and serve 3 years for the Irish hit. 4 months later, John Gotti prepares to leave for prison, bidding farewell to his family as the police arrive to escort him. The scene shifts to 1975 as Neil visits John in prison. He gives John the good news that he will be promoted from his position as a soldier to captain after serving his time in jail. Neil also informs him that Carlo had another heart attack, but John feels that this means that Neil is one step closer to being the head of the family, as he is the most senior member after Carlo. Neil also informs John that he has heard that John's crew is getting mixed with drugs, which is against the family's policy, and if they are caught, they will be killed. Later in prison, Angie tells John about a fellow inmate, Joey Perillo, who got into a beef with another inmate for stealing some drugs from the black inmates. While John still tries to determine the relevancy of this information, Angie tells him they need to save Joey since he claims to know Sammy Gravano, a fellow member and friend of John. John then meets the chief and strikes a deal with him in exchange for the lost drugs, saving Joey from the mess. The story fast-forwards 18 months to when John is released from prison after serving his time. A huge party is held as everyone celebrates John's freedom and his new position as a captain. Neil arrives and informs him that Carlo just passed away, and before dying, he named Paul Castellano as his successor instead of Neil. John gets very upset after hearing this news and tells Neil that he and the others all wanted him to be the next boss, as they think that Paul is just a businessman with no street knowledge of how things actually work. Meanwhile, some agents keep an eye on John from across the street as they desperately try to gather more evidence against the Gambino family. Later, at the family meeting, Paul assigns Neil as his underboss and asserts his dominance over the rest. Neil introduces John to DB, who handles the porn business, and Sammy, who runs a construction business. During the meeting, Paul tells everyone that times are changing, and they must now work alongside other mafia families. When John is asked to kill Nicky, Sammy's brother-in-law, he declines because Nicky is not within his territory. Sammy offers to do the job, since Nicky is his brother-in-law and his problem. John then leaves the meeting abruptly, saying that he has to return to the streets, since that's where the money's at. Later, John gets into a heated argument with Angie for running drugs in his absence. Angie informs him that under Paul's rule, they cannot earn much and must seek alternative sources of income. He also informs John that a large portion of this income goes to Paul, and he has no objections to accepting the money, but John reminds him that Paul is the boss and can do whatever he wants. Afterward, John meets up with DB and Sammy in a club, discussing their businesses over drinks. As they depart, Sammy advises John to consider having a legitimate business as well. After leaving the club, Sammy meets Nicky and asks him to demonstrate the quality of the goods. However, just as Nicky is about to climb the ladder, Sammy makes an attempt to shoot him from behind. Sammy's gun gets stuck, but he eventually kills his brother-in-law. Later, John's son Frank is hit by their neighbor Favara's car, and dies as a result of his injuries. Sammy arrives at the funeral to pay his condolences and learns that Favara was responsible for this incident, so he takes his men and kills Favara. 4 years later in Brooklyn, while Angie goes to collect some cash, John gets into a fight with the driver of the truck because their car is blocking traffic. John tries to be patient, but when the man keeps banging on the phone booth, he loses his cool and violently attacks him. John is arrested as a result, and the case receives extensive media coverage. John is surrounded by a group of news reporters outside the courtroom who grill him with inquiries, but John displays his charm and leaves. Later, John's lawyer informs him that Angie and his other crew members are under investigation for drug trafficking, and that the FBI has some recordings of Angie. Paul holds a meeting and decides to kill Angie and John because of their drug involvement. This idea, however, is not well received by Sammy and the rest of the family. After the meeting, Sammy questions Paul's leadership as the head of the family, and all the captains agree with him that Paul is not a good fit as a leader and they would have preferred to work under Neil. Later, Neil and John meet at Frank's grave, sharing an emotional bond. Neil tells him that Paul is justified in killing John and his men because they broke the rule against dealing drugs. John tries to convince him that Paul is not an ideal leader, but Neil decides to stay loyal to his boss. Following that, Sammy meets with John and informs him that DB and the others are on their side and want Paul dead. He asks John when they should kill Paul, and John responds that they must wait until Neil dies. Short time later, Neil takes his last breath in front of John, who announces Neil's death to all the members of the Gambino family. Everyone notices how Paul didn't even bother to come say goodbye to his underboss. The scene cuts to December 16, 1985, as the day finally comes when they had planned to kill Paul. John and Sammy sit in the car outside a restaurant where Paul is invited for a meeting, but just as he is about to exit the car, he gets killed by John's men. After Paul's death, John is made the new boss of the Gambino crime family, and everyone celebrates the newly elected leader. Later, John is called to court for the assault charges against him for attacking the truck driver. However, the driver changes his statement and says he doesn't recognize John as the attacker. This upsets the FBI, who are waiting for a chance to arrest John. They hold a meeting and decide to start the RICO investigation on John and other members of the Gambino family. John is warned that the U.S. attorney is hell-bent on forming a RICO case against him, and he should avoid getting attention. John parties at the club with all the members of the Gambino family, who appreciate him for being a good boss to them. The FBI agents confront John in the club's restroom and inform him that he has been targeted for a hit and that they are required by law to inform him of this. John is acquitted of the assault allegations against him, which further increases his popularity. The FBI jokes that if this keeps continuing like this, he may one day become the city's mayor. Angie warns John that DB is planning on turning on him, but John does not believe him because there is no concrete proof of this allegation and he believes DB is solid. Sammy and John meet later, and John tells him about all the struggles he has gone through to be in this position. Sammy reassures him not to worry and says he will keep an eye on DB and take care of everything. Later, while Frank and Chico are leaving a meeting, the car explodes, killing both of them instantly. John gathers the Gambino family to discuss the incident, delivering a speech that motivates everyone to stay strong. John is then warned that the explosion was meant for him and that he needs to be careful of his potential enemies. Sammy mentions Angie's information about DB at a meeting, claiming that he might be right to suspect DB of betraying the family. John is reluctant, but everyone feels that DB must be behind this and he should be taken out. Later, Sammy calls DB at his office to discuss business, but while they are talking, Sammy's guy shoots him from behind. John visits Angie, who is diagnosed with cancer. Angie apologizes to John for not listening to him and getting mixed with the drug business. Meanwhile, the agents who are investigating John successfully locate their secret gathering spot, bugging the whole place. While meeting, John and his attorney are not aware that the FBI agents are recording their conversation. His lawyer warns him that they might not win the next trial and suggests making a deal with the prosecutor, but John rejects it, wanting to fight all the way. Later, John meets Frankie Lucasio at the same bugged apartment to discuss family business regarding Sammy. They discuss how Sammy has been earning a lot for the family but taking away opportunities from others out of greed. They accuse Sammy of framing DB as they realize that Sammy took over all of DB's businesses. They mention Sammy murdering DB and a long list of other people including Sammy's brother-in-law. The agents record the entire conversation and now have strong evidence against the Gambino family. On December 11, 1990, John, Sammy, and others were arrested on several serious criminal charges. At the court session, the tape is played in front of everyone, which delivers a direct confession of DB's murder. Sammy feels betrayed to learn what John thinks about him. The session concludes with John's arrest, and the court is temporarily adjourned till Monday for the actual trial. Sammy later confronts John in the cell about the tape, expressing his resentment towards John. Sammy reminds John of everything, all the killings he's done for him, but John argues with him while confronting him with the fact that the tapes can't be trusted. John comforts him by saying he will get them both out of the cell soon. Sammy still feels betrayed and decides to talk to the prosecutors. He tries to strike a deal in which he will confess all of his crimes and provide evidence against John in exchange for a shorter sentence. He also agrees to testify against everyone in the Gambino family. The news reports the incident and Sammy's decision to testify. The trial begins, and Sammy tells the truth, establishing a strong case against John and the others. The verdict is read, and John is found guilty and sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more videos.